Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. This will be the continuation of Yuuei Survival Guide. This will be Part 30, Chapter 30. No. Shota lifts his head from where he'd had his face hidden in his hands, gaze sweeping toward Hisashi. The blonde had a dangerous glint in his eyes as he stares Tsukuyoshi down over the rim of his regular red-framed glasses. It's Shota, Hisashi, Tsukuyoshi, Vlad King, and Nezu, all sitting around the rounded table. The hospital had graciously allowed them to borrow a conference room, since Shota had absolutely no intention of leaving the hospital at all, until all 38 students were awake and coherent, unless, of course, word of Izuku and Bakugo's whereabouts came in which case he was planning on raining down hell. "You can't. No, not can't. You won't," Hisashi stressed the words, his voice whipping a snap that demanded attention and had silence falling over the men in the room. "You will not be putting us on the bench. I refuse to just sit around and twiddle my thumbs when 2 of my students have been kidnapped." "You're too close to this," Tsukuyoshi huffed as he tugged his hat off his head, setting it down on the tabletop. He ran his fingers through his hair stressfully, before focusing his attention back on Hisashi with a brief glance at Shota. "Both of you are. This isn't just the 2 of your students that are going missing. Izuku's your kid now. He was taken. I'd never, in my right mind, let any parent of a missing child be an active part of the case, Mike. You know that." "We're pro-heroes," Hisashi snaps back. "We aren't just any parent here, Tsukuyoshi. We're their teachers. We're pro-heroes. We're supposed to protect them, no matter who their parents are. Sure, Izuku's our kid now, but that doesn't change the fact that he was taken by villains on a school trip, that he and Bakugo were gone. It changes nothing that Izuku's our foster son, because before that, he was just our student, and I gotta tell you, Tsukuyoshi, I'd tear the world apart for any of my students, you dig?" Tsukuyoshi opens his mouth to reply, eyes narrowed on Hisashi, but he's beaten to the punch by Nezu. The principal stands up in his chair, little paws pressed against the edge of the table as he surveys over the chaos. The rat clears his throat in instantly. Tsukuyoshi's mouth clicks shut. "Though I admit I'm not quite as sold at the 2 of you being involved in this investigation due to various reasons." Nezu smiles blandly, pointedly looking between Shota and Hisashi. "I have known the 2 of you long enough to know that no matter what's decided in this room, it won't stop either of you from pursuing this. Trust in this. Detective Tsukuyoshi, Aizawa-kun, and Yamada-kun have no intention of just letting you handle this." Neither of the 2 mentioned men have the decency to look sheepish, both just pointedly staring at the detective across the table. Nezu has known them since they were teenagers. If anyone would be able to read them like open books, it would be the most intelligent creature Japan has to offer, who just so happens to have been their teacher all those years ago. Shota's eye flicks between the detective, his boss, and Hisashi. Honestly, Tsukuyoshi looks beat, deflating under the rodent's words as he shoots a hesitant glance between Hisashi and Nezu. Nezu himself looks oddly pleased, though there is a flicker of uncertainty in his beady black eyes, and Hisashi really does look seconds away from burning the world to the ground, if it'll help get the boys back. Shota blows out a breath through his nose as he tries to organize his thoughts. He slumps down in his chair as he regards Tsukuyoshi with a frown. The tension in the room is sharp, but Shota can't just sit here while everyone glares between themselves. It's not helping anything. They're sitting around bickering about who can and can't be part of the investigation, who can and can't help and find 2 missing teens, when they should be out trying to find and rescue his students. It's illogical. It's plain stupid. There are students missing. There are 2 parents missing a child. Shota had to tell 2 parents that their son had been kidnapped. The Bakugo family had been the first informed of what went down at the boot camp, of what was lost. Even if they didn't disclose the second kidnapped child's identity, even if Shota knew the Bakugos have known Izuku far longer than he and Hisashi are missing a child. The reminding thought rears at his heart and constricts suffocatingly around the muscle. Izuku's missing. He can just squeeze his eyes shut and hope the moment of sheer panic passes quickly. Drowning in emotions won't help rescue his kids. The League of Villains, the same group who'd attacked the USJ and almost taken out All Might after making quick work of both Shota himself and 13, currently had 2 of their students. This wasn't the time to be at each other's throats debating whether people were able to aid in finding them or not. Bakugo and Izuku are in serious danger, and the 5 of them sitting around and arguing is not helping. Shota narrows his eyes on Tsukuyoshi, and, almost as if feeling the gaze, Tsukuyoshi's attention flicks towards Shota. The underground hero cocks one eyebrow. "What exactly do you have on this so far?" If Tsukuyoshi's annoyed by the persistent shift in conversation topic, in a direction he's blatantly against, He doesn't say anything about it. Instead, Tsukuchi heaves a sigh at the question and tips his head back so he's staring at the ceiling. He's quiet for a long, long second before he's letting his gaze settle back on the men sitting around him, leaning heavily back in his chair as he does. The League of Villains have been on our radar since before the USJ attack, though I can't say that we've considered them an active threat until the USJ. To be completely honest, we don't have a lot of intel on them. It's hard to track people who have a gateway to new destinations. When we get even the slightest bit too close, they jump ship and disappear without a trace through those voids. And, as I'm sure we're all aware at this point, as soon as they step through that void portal, they could be anywhere. I'm not sure their limitations reside in Japan solely. That's just how little intel we actually have. Not to mention that there are very few pros who've actually encountered the group, let alone have anything useful for us. At this point, we hardly know more than the fact that Shigaraki Tomura is the leader, and the warp-quirked villain goes by Kurogiri. And what came up when you ran those two names through the database? Nothing. Tsukuchi answers Nezu with a grimace. Neither of those identities even exist. We're at a loss. There's not a lot we can do with just names, especially when they're obviously aliases. No previous criminal activity that's known, no fingerprints, no DNA. Fake names, and nothing came up when we ran their quirks through either. Nothing's been filed under decay or warp or any other synonyms for those two quirks, so we really don't have anything to work with. The detective pauses, glances up toward the ceiling again, like he's racking his brain for more useful knowledge before he's glancing back at the group. There's been reports of other members, but nothing concrete. My best guess is that Shigaraki has at least 5 villains working directly for him, but we all know he has connections. Dozens of villains that attack the USJ. He doesn't need to be underestimated here. So we have no idea what we're working with. Vlad summarizes with a huff. It's odd to see the way the built stony man sinks into his chair just the same as anyone else. Logically, Shota knows he's a man just the same as any of them, sods Nezu, but it's still startling to see. Shigaraki could have a whole army hidden away and we wouldn't know. The detective's face falls slightly, but he makes no attempt to deny Vlad's words. Who do you have working on the case? Nezu asks calmly, whiskers arcing in interest. Another sigh leaves Tsukuchi's lungs as he finally sits up straighter and cocks his attention towards Nezu. I have a couple of colleagues who've been a part of the case since it started, but besides them it's been confidential. I've been select about who I trust to work on the case up until now. Confidential? Izashi narrows his eyes. Why? At this, Tsukuchi hesitates, eyes darting to Nezu before looking back at the two husbands seated almost thigh to thigh at the table and trying to formulate a response. It's not hard to tell that that's what the detective's trying to do. Nezu doesn't look confused, so Shota just knows that the rodent is in on whatever's happening. Figures. Shota studies Tsukuchi, blinks once, then twice, before his mouth falls open in surprise. All Might. What? Izashi jerks his head to look at Shota, but Shota's narrowed eyes are bouncing between an almost guilty-looking Tsukuchi and an intent Nezu. Nezu's studying Shota, whiskers flicking in that pleased way they do when he's bordering on, well, pleased. What does All Might have to do with all this? Shota straightens up from where he slumped, leaning towards Tsukuchi. Don't play dumb on this, Tsukuchi. All Might has something to do with it. The kids are missing. What the hell's going on? The detective is quiet for another long second before he shakes his head. I'm sorry, Eraser, but I'm not at liberty to say it's confidential. Our kids are missing! Izashi slams his palms down on the table. Confidential my ass! Tsukuchi, what could the League possibly want with 2 heroic students? Why do they keep targeting us? What the hell does this have to do with Yagi? I can't tell you. Tsukuchi frowns apologetically. He really looks torn and sympathetic, but fury swirls in Shota's stomach despite his words. 2 children are missing. Now is not the time for secrecy. We will find those 2 boys. We will bring Izuku and Katsuki home. We have officers and pros on the case. They will be found. How can you be so sure? Vlad's arms cross over his chest, unwavering gaze casted at Tsukuchi. It's nice to have someone else on their side. Vlad had been there too. He'd seen the shit show unfold. He'd suffered the hardship of the attack as well. He'd put himself on the line for his students and waded through the aftermath just as Shota and the Pussycats had. Khan had to deal with the fact that they'd lost 2 kids, and even if those 2 students weren't technically his own, he'd been there too. Shota will admit that he and Vlad don't always get along. He doesn't even really know where that stupid rivalry he hardly plays into came from, but they're on the same playing field right now. They're both guilty and furious and upset. They're equally responsible for the 2 students going missing, even if Shota can't help but feel like he's solely responsible. Vlad cocks an eyebrow as he shifts tensely in his chair. You said yourself you're at a loss. How the hell do you plan on magically finding where the students are being held captive? We have connections. Tsukuchi clears his throat. There are probably vigilantes who know more details about this. They get closer to the villains. They see more, are more involved without abiding by the laws like the rest of us. There's got to be someone who knows something. We just have to find them. This startles a laugh out of Shota. It's dark and tired and not funny, but he laughs anyway. Hizashi's hand squeezes at his knee, and everyone glances toward him, faces furrowed with confusion. Shota can't help the way his tone turns sarcastic. You're going to target vigilantes for information? Tsukuchi bristles, eyebrows drawn together in surprise. The detective opens his mouth, shuts it sharply before finally finding his voice. Vigilantes have just as much interaction with villains as the pros do, Eraser. Probably even more so. Someone has to know something about the League. That won't work. They aren't going to talk to you, Tsukuchi. Shota tells him tiredly, like he's talking to a child. Shota doesn't know why the detective is so convinced everything will just fall into place like this, but it won't. You're the police. What they do is illegal. Read between the lines. There are 2 kids' lives on the line, Eraser. That won't matter. The underground hero scoffs. You're not to be trusted. It doesn't matter what you say, what you offer them, what plea or sob story you offer up. Words mean nothing, Tsukuchi. You're their enemy, just as much as the villains they fight are. They won't trust you. You're law enforcement, and I know for a fact that you've tried to arrest nearly half of the vigilantes protecting this city at one point or another. It's my job, Aizawa. Tsukuchi snaps back, his mask of cool and collected cracking away. It's almost shocking to see his face and his whole facade crumbling under the stress. He's known Tsukuchi for a lot of years now, and on some days he might even consider them friends, but it's not often that he lets the stress get to him. Now. Nezu smiles tightly, paws waving in a placating gesture. We are all frustrated, but we must all remember we're on the same team. We all want the same thing. Those 2 boys brought home safe and sound. The rodent pauses, before his gaze is back on Tsukuchi. Aizawa-kun has a point, Detective. Those vigilantes have no reason to aid you or any other law enforcement official, even if the case is of utmost importance and there are children's lives on the line. They will not trust you, as Aizawa-kun mentioned. We can't do nothing. Tsukuchi narrows his eyes at Nezu. Shota can't help but think it's a bold move that he cut Nezu off, and it's clearly a mutual thought when he, Vlad, and Hizashi all share a glance. They're our best bet at finding those boys, at finding the League. I didn't say we should do nothing. The corner of Nezu's lips twitch, but his smile doesn't wane. I'm simply saying that you are not who we need to mediate, Detective Tsukuchi. The silence that settles after Nezu stops talking is quiet enough that you could hear a pin drop. What? Tsukuchi blinks owlishly after a moment of stunned silence. Nezu waits a second longer before finally speaking. It's no question that we need outside help. Vigilantes draw the line between criminal and hero, so I suspect you're correct when you say someone somewhere must know something, but it's absurd of us to play cat and mouse of a game targeting vigilantes when there's a far simpler solution. Which is? Vlad cocks an eyebrow. Nezu smiles brightly, head lolling in Shota's direction. The dark-haired man narrows his eyes at the rodent, not shifting from his slouch. Nezu gives back just as fiercely as he's receiving, smile widening when Shota's scowl deepens. You've got to be joking. I'm not, Nezu chirps. It's no secret that you have a soft spot for the vigilantes. Surely the detective is bound to know that as well. A glance at a unimpressed but not surprised Tsukuchi proves it. And I know quite a few underground heroes that share the same sentiment, and have also turned a blind eye when it comes to vigilantes. Hang on, Hizashi frowns. You want Shota to be out gathering intel? Now? He's running on 3 days without actual sleep. 2 of his students have been kidnapped by the same people who muddled his brain around in his head like a mojito. Half of his class is hospital-bound, and you want him to what, just jump into patrols and harass vigilantes for information? Hizashi, Shota warns softly. It's hardly getting through to the blonde who's still glaring daggers at Nezu. No. Nezu's smile softens the faintest bit, almost amused at Hizashi's antics. I'm very aware of Aizawa-kun's current state. He's in no place to be actively patrolling, nor would I trust him to hold a civil conversation for long. Shota doesn't know whether he should be relieved or offended. I'm fine. What I was getting at, Nezu bulldozes right over Shota's words. was the fact that we will have far more success if we branch out and ask underground heroes to ask our vigilantes if they happen to have come across a patrol about the League of Villains. A handful of vigilantes trust some of the pros that they come in contact with on patrol. Trust is a two-way street. That's a starting point. We'll have better odds if it's someone familiar to them asking the questions instead of police pressing for information with the threat of incarceration looming overhead, even if it's not verbally threatened. Surely you understand, Detective? We can't share too many details, Tsukuji replies, mouth pulled in a straight line. It's a matter of national security. So we don't mention All Might, Hisashi huffs. There are 2 kids missing. Pros will want to help. Vigilantes will want to help if there's no risk of getting arrested. I mean, we didn't even know Yagi was involved until you started talking about confidentiality. Probably wouldn't have guessed at it if Sho hadn't connected all the dots. I concur, Nezu nods sharply. We won't even mention All Might, or even the police, if the request for extra help extends from Aizawa-kun, who has a good relationship with both his fellow underground heroes and the vigilantes he comes into contact with. We won't risk mentioning Yagi's involvement, whatever that may be. His whiskers twitch, and Shota has a sinking feeling that Nezu definitely knows what whatever that may be is. That rat is always in the know, whether people want him there or not. Our priority as of now is to locate and rescue Bakugo Katsuki and Midori Izuku, Nezu continues easily. Everything else will come second to me and my staff until those 2 students are safe. Of course, Tsukuji nods. That's our main goal as well. Civilian safety comes first. We'll bring those 2 boys home safely. Of course, Nezu repeats, little paws interlacing together. Now then. He chimes brightly, looking between his 3 staff members. You 3 are dismissed. The detective and I have some things to discuss. I understand this is quite difficult, so please do remember to take care of yourselves. I will find you later, so until then. Vlad is the first to dismiss himself, followed by Shota and Hisashi standing to follow. Oh, Aizawa-kun. Shota paused, turning his head to slowly see Nezu's head lolled once again in his direction. He hadn't moved an inch, nose twitching as his black eyes tracked Shota's movements. A moment, please. Hisashi pauses as well, but Shota takes one look in Nezu's eyes and decides it's best not to try and push the rat. He cocks an eyebrow as he gives Hisashi's shoulder a gentle push towards the door. The blonde hesitates for just a second before finally slipping out and pulling it shut behind him. Hisashi knows when not to push Nezu as well. Yeah, Shota huffs once the door is clicked shut, finally turning back towards the room, arms crossing over his chest when he's suddenly aware of how he's awkwardly holding them at his sides. Nezu's eyes track the movements intently, but he thankfully doesn't mention it. I understand that it's difficult to just wait when 2 students are missing. Nezu's voice has softened to something Shota isn't even sure he's heard before, in the entire time he's known the stoat. We're all on high alert, and we're doing everything we can to find our students. This does not fall solely on you, Aizawa-kun. We are all to blame. We all could have done better, Yuuei and myself especially. Shota decides then that he must really look like shit if he's getting a pep talk from Nezu, if he's being consoled by quite possibly one of the most cunning creatures he's ever come into contact with. Shota doesn't speak, just watches his boss uncertainly. Now, there are a few other things to discuss, Nezu finally continues when he realizes Shota isn't going to talk. But for now, please try to rest. The detective and I'll iron out some of the final details, and I'll find you. You're welcome to start reaching out to any of your underground mutuals who you might think will be of assistance, but I do urge you to take a small break before. Things will only get harder from here, Aizawa-kun, and I need you to be prepared. All right. Shota bows his head. It's no use arguing. Shota can take this for what it really is. Nezu has things in the works, and Shota's bound to be part of it. He's been granted some downtime. I take it you'll be around in the hospital. Nezu's voice has returned to the chipper brightness that he tends to always fall behind. But Shota hears the gravity of the situation. He gives Nezu the same courtesy of not mentioning it that Nezu had offered him earlier, and instead shoots his boss a flat look that perfectly conveys his response without words. The stoat lets out a huff of laughter, smiling at Shota in a clear, wordless dismissal. The dark-haired man eyes the 2 that are remaining in the room before swiftly turning on his heels and following his co-workers out of the room. He lets the door click shut behind him and huffs out a snort of exhausted laughter. As Hisashi, who'd been leaning against the wall right across from the door, jerks up to full height. Nezu waits for exactly 1 minute, listening to the receding footsteps of Aizawa and Yamada before finally turning his full attention to the detective at its side. Neither of them had moved an inch, each still just staring at the other thoughtfully, gearing up for the continuation of the conversation. I trust that Yagi will be the next informed of what we discussed here. Nezu stares intently at the detective, fingers interlaced still, but now squeezing tightly. Though I can't say I'm pleased to have to keep my trusted staff in the dark, I do understand why. When I agreed to let Yagi teach at Yuuei so he could find a successor, I didn't anticipate anything like this happening. There have been at least 2 attacks on my school, and we haven't even finished the first semester. He's my next stop. Tsukuji bows his head in agreement. All for One is a dangerous man. He'll stop at nothing to kill All Might, to kill One for All, and we can assume that Shigaraki and the League of Villains are just as dangerous. Which begs the question of if All for One and the League of Villains know who Midori Izuku is. Nezu hums blandly in reply. I don't take lightly to my students being in danger, Tsukuji. We don't know why Bakugo and Midori were really taken. We don't know what these villains have planned for them. There's nothing we can do, and not even the number 1 hero can help us as of current. Tsukuji blows out a breath, rubbing at his eyes. I know. The detective pauses, digging his palms deeper into his eyes. We just need a location. Then we can send All Might in, and the only thing that we can do is sit on our hands and wait. We can't do anything until we know where we need to be. I don't like that we're handing this over to underground heroes and vigilantes. We're just throwing unsuspecting people into a dangerous fight, not even giving them a heads up. We're asking for information. Nezu shakes his head. And even that we might not get. When all this boils down to is word of mouth and luck, neither of which I enjoy relying on. Yeah, I really don't like this. Tsukuji repeats, finally picking his hat up and setting it back on his head. Neither do I, Nezu agrees. It's in no way a sound plan, but we're grasping at straws. Anything is better than nothing, Detective. We'll have more luck letting trusted heroes try to get some answers than we will arresting or cornering vigilantes via your means. Shota can't even think about arguing the fact that Azashi gently wraps an arm around his shoulders and leads him away from the conference room as they'd all been using. He knows, logically, he should be worried about his class of gremlins, seeing them act so domestic, even if they're not all topping the classes when it comes to grades, that they can all read between the lines. That they're all nosy little brats who can and will snoop for information. If he weren't so worried about Izuku and Bakugo and the rest of his students and the mess of the media that they're going to make of this and All Might and God, just about everything else under the sun that could and probably would go wrong, not to mention how emotionally drained he is, he might have even had half of a thought to shove Azashi away. He doesn't. He just falls into step with his husband and hopes that none of his hell class catch them. He knows a decent half of the class is bedbound, and the remaining lot of them had been increasingly protective of their still hospitalized friends. It makes his check-in patrols a hell of a lot easier when it comes to visiting a handful of rooms and being able to count his full, almost, roster without scouring the hospital. Visiting hours have long since passed as the evening steadily crawls up. Bakugo and Izuku had been missing for almost 24 hours. The thought makes Shota's stomach churn. He has 2 kids missing, and there's nothing he can do. Nothing the police can do. Hell, there isn't even anything All Might can do. Despite visiting hours being over, they'd somehow managed to talk the hospital staff into allowing the students to stay, even if they weren't admitted. Maybe it was the desperation in Shota's eyes when he asks, or the fact that he was a pro-hero. It was Yuuei high school business that made them cave, he's not sure. Either way, Shota can't say it isn't a weight off his chest to have all the students contained in the same building, to be able to slink down to a hospital corridor and do a head count without even announcing himself. All the students as guardians had been called and informed of what took place at the boot camp. Some parents had arrived to be with their kids, while others had conveyed their relief over the phone and settled for speaking to their children. Neither Shota or Vlad disclosed that any of the children had gone missing. It was only a matter of time until the news sunk its teeth into it, and it was everywhere. They didn't need terrified parents and guardians hurrying that process along. The more time they had to figure this out without being the center of attention, the better. Shota is so lost in his thoughts that he's hardly even aware that they're now in a secluded little sitting area. They're hidden away by a wall of fake potted plants and 2 green greenery. It's not overly secluded, it's not closed off, just hidden. Still, he can't bring it upon himself to care about that when Hisashi's arms are wrapping around him and holding him tight as he buries his own face in the crook of the blonde's neck. Hisashi is shaking, and it takes Shota a second too long to realize so is he. It's no secret that Hisashi had been crying. His eyes are almost as red as the frames of his glasses, and though he's not an ugly crier, his cheeks and nose are still dusted with redness, and it looks like he'd been crying. Shota almost wishes that he could cry too. But then again, he thinks if he started crying now, he just wouldn't be able to stop. It's Shota who pulls away from the hug first, but not entirely. He snakes a hand around Hizashi's waist and leads them both to the leather love seat that's settled between the two matching armchairs and a magazine-covered coffee table. All Might's face is on more than half of the covers, and Shota wonders if it would be petty of him to flip them over. Hizashi plops down first, and Shota's pulled along. He doesn't resist, just falls into Hizashi's side. They sit in silence for a while, just enjoying the other's company. Vlad is doing his rounds with the hospital, trying to see all of his students, because quite a few of them were still unconscious due to the gas, so there's more rooms for him to check. Shota doubts their colleague will even look for them, unless something goes wrong. "How are you holding up?" Shota lets his head loll in Hizashi's direction, a frown pinched on his lips. He wants to turn the question around on Hizashi, repeat it back, and expect his own state to be brushed over, but he knows it won't. Hizashi won't do that. "As well as someone who lost 2 teenagers can be," Shota replies bitterly. "It's not your fault, Shota," Hizashi whispers. "I was supposed to protect them, Hizashi," Shota hisses under his breath. "And I didn't." "So were Khan and the Pussycats," Hizashi fires back, his tone neutral. When Shota doesn't look towards him, the blonde hooks a finger under Shota's chin and directs him to make his attention fall on him. "There were 6 pro-heroes there, Shota, not 1. This isn't your fault. If you don't blame Khan or the Pussycats, and I know you don't, you can't blame yourself either." He wants to argue. Really, he does. A heated retort sits on the tip of his tongue, one that he's sure will annoy Hizashi and frustrate him further to no end, but when he opens his mouth to force the words out, to deny Hizashi's words and take full responsibility for his inability to keep the boys safe, nothing comes out. The angry words die on his tongue, and instead he just stares at the doorway between the wall and the mock wall of fake potted plants. His eyes ache in that way they do, and his body's trying to cry, but with no success, so he squeezes his eyes shut. "They're my kids," Shota finally whispers, unable to keep the tremor from his voice. And it's true. Every year he tells himself he won't get attached to the newest wave of kids on the roster. Every year he fails. Every year they manage to weasel their way in, but no year quite like this current one. No year has been through what his 1A kids have been through. He's always liked kids, even if he'll never admit it. Maybe he doesn't always like his kids. When Bakugo starts small fires, when there definitely shouldn't be small fires, or when Kaminari accidentally blows the breaker and causes a school-wide blackout, when Ida tries to backseat teach him, or when Kirishima accidentally breaks a desk with his quirk, or when Uraraka gets school property stuck to the roof with hers. Maybe he doesn't always like them, but he never stops caring. Their flaws are almost charming, or they are almost charming after the fact, when he's staring up at various school supplies decorating his ceiling, his office chair amongst them for whatever reason, or when he extinguishes a small fire spreading through a training gym. He can't say it's always very charming. "I know, Sho," Hizashi mutters, and that's when Shota realizes that he'd been tugged into Hizashi's chest, that his nose had squished against his husband's shoulder, and his eyes had slipped shut. The ache of the lack of sleep and the quirk overuse and just keeping his eyes open for too long, finally easing. They cling to each other for a while. Hizashi may be crying again, but Shota's not too sure. He doesn't have the motivation to lift his head to check. Isn't even sure he'd want to see if Hizashi's actually crying. He's not sure he could take seeing his husband cry right now. When Shota can think straight, and his eyes don't burn, he opens them. The underground hero pulls his phone out. If he wants to help fast, he needs to get the word out before night patrols start. There are a handful of trusted underground heroes that he trusts to help them, and even has a few vigilantes saved in his phone contact as well. He reaches out to them directly. It can't hurt to get the message out directly through vigilantes. He knows there are circles that quite a few of them meet up in. They're more likely to talk amongst each other than amongst a pro-hero or an officer. So he keeps his messages broad when addressing the vigilantes. The less they know, the better. He doubts they'll even want to have any more details than he gives. They'll just need to know enough to get the job done. He makes sure not to mention anything about the police or All Might, just asks that anyone who knows any information about the League of Villains contact him, or anonymously report it to the police. Tsukuji had mentioned a direct line to his men so they could keep this as contained as possible. He's praying that something will come up. Anything. By the time Katan wakes up, the bar is filled with villains. Izuku had periodically seen all the villains throughout the evening, 1 or 2 usually keeping watch on them, even if Katan was still out cold and Izuku was fairly useless with his limbs busted. He keeps his head ducked as the villains talk to Kachan, listening silently to their plans. He's thankful they don't seem intent on hurting the explosive teen, but then again they are being held captive. Shigaraki's proposition for Kachan sinks into Izuku's gut like a stone. They want him to join their side. They want Kachan, who's been stuck on being a hero for just as long as Izuku has, to join forces with them. A small part of Izuku can see it. Kachan doesn't always have the attitude of a hero. He doesn't usually work well in a team setting, and he hates everything having to do with relying on anyone who isn't himself. He's brash, and he doesn't always think things through. He gets caught up in his own ego sometimes, and he did have a period of his life where he hadn't been a nice person, where he could have been considered a bully. Clearly the League had picked up on it. They kidnapped him in hopes of getting him to join their side, playing into what they assumed was resentment. They'd seen the sports festival. They'd seen Bakugo snarl and spit like a caged animal. They'd seen him be restrained and muzzled, and Izuku's not sure he'll ever really forgive the school for what they'd done to Kachan on live television, and he would have come to his childhood friend's defense if he hadn't been out of commission in Recovery Girl's office. There's something oddly pleasing about how Kachan can't even contain his anger when chained to a chair and being held captive, when he snarls at Shigaraki's face as the villain leader leans closer like he's getting through to Kachan, and he's angry for their cause, instead of boiling anger directed at the League of Villains. Izuku hadn't believed for a second that Kachan would join them. Now that he knows why they're here, he can't help but think it's silly. They risked capture to kidnap a student who they knew had a temper and a bad attitude, and they didn't even entertain the idea that Kachan wasn't as resentful as they thought, that he didn't want to be a hero with his whole entire being, that he didn't still idolize All Might even if he doesn't act like it. The League ignores Izuku for the most part, who counts himself lucky. Kachan had only glanced down at him once, eyebrows drawn between worry and flaming anger. He hadn't drawn any attention to Izuku when the muzzle was stripped off his face, and Izuku thinks he must not look great if Kachan's trying to keep the League distracted so they don't focus their attention on him. It's not long until Shigaraki gets fed up with him. Izuku doesn't think that the League of Villains leader had expected to try so hard to need to convince Katsuki to join them, nor had he expected to bash heads with the teenager as much as he had. The leader's mouth is pulled in a vicious snarl, and his fingers tense at his side like he's restraining from decaying something to relieve his own frustrations. He turns on his heels and strides out of the room, telling his followers not to bother him. Dabi makes a joke about Shigaraki having another tantrum that only a video game console can calm. Most of the villains laugh, well, except Kurogiri, and the one Izuku thinks is called Magne. Kachan remains quiet at Izuku's side, but he doesn't need to glance up to see he's still conscious. His muscles are tense, and his finger taps a frustrated patter against the chair's armrest. Kachan's breaths come out slow, but not as slow as they had when he'd been unconscious. He's just stewing. For a while they sit in silence as the bar comes to life around them. The League of Villains do their own thing, talking, arguing, laughing. Not a soul comes in, and Izuku wonders if they're even open. Kachan says nothing. Neither does Izuku. One by one the villains seem to disappear as the night carries on. First Dabi and Toga, who leave out the door in the bar. The one Izuku assumes leads to the outside. An escape point if they weren't both tied up or injured. Magne leaves to the back where Shigaraki had gone, and Spinner and Twice follow after her. Mr. Compass sits at the bar with Kurogiri, and the two converse quietly, but it's not much time later that the masked villain is disappearing through the doorway as well. That just leaves Izuku and Kachan under Kurogiri's watchful eyes. Izuku knows that he's not to be trusted, that he's a villain just as the rest of the League, but he can't help but blow out a relieved breath when the bar is finally empty. "Your friend really upset Tenko." Izuku turns slowly to where Hana is stood in the doorway. He hadn't seen her since before the League of Villains had gathered, since before Kachan woke up. Her arms are laced over her chest in that way that children attempt to look threatening. She's glaring at Kachan, but her lip is poked out in a pout. "Tenko's very mad," she continues as she finally steps into the room, standing nearly toe-to-toe with Kachan, eyes narrowed. She eyes him before seeming to deflate a little, head lolling towards Izuku. Why is this guy so angry?" "I'm sorry," Izuku tells her, simply to placate her, and her face screws up in a way that it had earlier when he'd apologized for their father mistreating Shigaraki. Kachan whips around to look at him in surprise. "The fuck are you apologizing for, Deku?" "Wait, is he really your friend?" She leans forward, eyeing him sharply. "He seems like a meanie." "He is," Izuku assures, ignoring Katsuki. Not a meanie, usually, but he is, really, and he's not mad. That's just how he usually looks. Are you fucking talking about me? Kachan's voice has the usual anger, but none of the volume. His eyes dart to the villain behind the bar, before his glare is back down on Izuku, and Izuku just ignores him again. You're so weird, the little girl chimes, finally stepping back from Katsuki to settle in front of Izuku. You're talking to me, with him and Kurogiri in the room, why? Kachan knows what I can do, Izuku explains lowly so Kurogiri doesn't hear. The void-quirked villain doesn't even stir, from where he's still organizing the bar. He doesn't think that he needs to explain what he means to the ghost, especially since they'd had this conversation already earlier. And Kurogiri's busy. Holy shit, Kachan mutters at Izuku's side. Your ghost is here? Thank fuck, he better fucking be able to get us out of this shit. No, Izuku's heart seizes in his chest at the reminder of the ghost that he's missing. He really wishes Oboro was here, honestly. Even if Oboro couldn't physically help, he could pass on directions, he could get them help. Hitoshi knows that Oboro exists. Oboro could have told him. He's not. She's from here. You have a ghost friend? Hana asks softly, drawing her knees up to her chest. I do, Izuku nods. He didn't make it to me in time. The gateway closed before he could. Fucking hell, Kachan growls under his breath, obviously listening along and piecing together things as he goes. Of course that shitty light flicker didn't make it. The one time we fucking need the bastard. Speaking of, what the hell are you even doing here, Deku? Last time I checked, you weren't the target. Why'd you get yourself kidnapped, you dumbass? Like I'd let you get kidnapped alone. Izuku snaps back in annoyance. Maybe it's the fact that he'd been awake the whole time, or the fact that both of his arms are broken and they hurt, but his patience is running very thin. Your dumb ego would just get you killed if you were here by yourself. Big talk from the one with 2 broken arms. Katsuki sneers. Like I need a Deku like you with me. I can hold my own, thank you very fucking much. You're such an ass. Izuku shakes his head. And you're a dumbass. Kachan fires back, eyes flicking to his 2 very broken arms and his bruising face. Looks like your rescue plan worked out remarkably well, huh, Deku? Got yourself kidnapped, too, instead of going to the fucking hospital where you should be. Is he worried about you? Hana, who'd been watching the whole interaction in interest, frowns. Yes. Izuku sucks in a breath through his nose, happy that Kachan doesn't know what's being said. Last thing he needs is to piss off the explosive team even more than he has. He is. He's always been like this, don't worry. What the fuck are you saying? Ignore him. Izuku offers softly to Hana when the girl's eyes jump nervously between them. He's like me, a hero in training too. He's a good guy. Him? Hana's face pinches in surprise as she gives Kachan another once-over. Seriously? I believed it when he was asleep, but now I don't know. Are you really sure? Deadly, Izuku deadpans, and it has the desired effect when the little girl snorts out a laugh. Kachan lets out a defeated huff at Izuku's side and seems to settle into silence. How is your friend going to help? Hana asks after a second of silence, her chin tucked between her knees as she stares at Izuku, features twisted in confusion. Could I help? I don't think so. Izuku shakes his head with a thankful smile. He can do things like play with fucking lights and scare the shit out of people. Kachan glares across the room. Izuku doesn't know how his childhood friend knows what he's talking about, but he rolls with it. Somehow manages to be a little shit without being heard or visible, or hardly even fucking existing. Yeah, I guess. But he's also good at getting people's attention, so if he knew where we were, he might be able to bring help. There's a lot of people looking for us, and he might be able to lead them here, if he knew where we were, at least. Oh. She worries her bottom lip between her teeth. What would happen to Tenko if the people looking for you found you here? His silence is answer enough. He doesn't know how to explain all the bad things the villain has done, attacking the school, nearly killing 2 pro-heroes, kidnapping. He'd obviously be arrested, and rightfully so, but that's not something you tell a little girl about her beloved little brother. She seems to get the gist. Oh. I don't even think you could help, Izuku carries on softly. You'd have to be able to find people you've never met before, and there's no telling where they even are, and then you need to get their attention. Can all ghosts fuck around with that shit? The question comes from Kachan, and Izuku pauses for a second. Or is it just your asshole ghost friend? The green-haired teen frowns. The lights always seem like a pretty easy task. He used to ask ghosts to flicker his lights when he was little, but none had ever really done much more. Not that they were around a lot. He is curious, though. Can you play with things, like the lights, or touch things, make them move? Not really, Hana huffs. Well, sorta, I guess. I can make it flicker, but then I get really tired. And I can make Tenko's games turn off. He gets very mad, always yells a whole bunch. It's funny. Izuku likes how the little girl's smile curls fondly as she speaks, but then he remembers who she's talking about. It's Shigaraki, the villain who tried to kill Shota, the villain keeping them hostage, who'd targeted them during a school event and kidnapped them. Okay, Izuku says, trying to refocus. I don't think you'd be able to help much then. That's okay, though. She looks torn between remorse and relief as she nods. After seeing that face, Izuku knows that even if she could help, he wouldn't ask it of her. There's a loyalty to her brother that he doesn't quite understand, and he doesn't want to force or trick her into anything. They settle into another silence, which is broken by Kacchan, who's looking around the room suspiciously. How many are there in a dump like this? Izuku glances around too in an attempt to spot any ghosts, but he only sees Hana. He turns his attention to her, only to find her watching him. He cocks an eyebrow in question. Me, she says proudly. There were others too, though. Like Mom and Dad and Grandma and Grandpa, but they all left. Sometimes they come back and visit, but they don't stay long, not like me. And then there are people that die here. I don't like when that happens. But they don't stay here very long, either. They're very noisy. Cry a lot. Why do you stay, then? Izuku asks, carefully, softly. The girl hesitates. I don't like what Sensei does. She's quiet for a long second, eyes locked on the ground. He's very mean, but he pretends like he loves Tenko. I don't think he does, though. He does bad things to him. I don't want to leave him alone. What? Izuku swallows down the fear. What does he do? Hana opens her mouth to respond, but shuts it with a desperate shake of her head. Bad things. Izuku decides not to press even if he really, really wants to. What do you know about Sensei? Izuku feels Kacchan's eyes on him, but he doesn't look. Not away from Hana. She's playing with a thread on her shirt, desperately, not looking at him. He scares me, she offers. When he takes Tenko back, I can't be there. Tenko used to scream. I don't know, but, he's sorta nice to Tenko sometimes, like he gave him Kurogiri. Kurogiri's been taking care of him for a long time now. I'm glad he has him. What is that? What do you mean, gave him? Hana puckers her lips in thought, before shrugging her shoulders. I don't really know. He just sort of showed up one day with Sensei. He's taken good care of Tenko since then, and it's funny because Tenko's a brat most of the time. I don't know where Sensei found him, or what they did to him, but, I think he really loves Tenko now. He's never left since meeting him. Izuku lets his eyes drift to where Kurogiri is wiping the counter, almost as if feeling his gaze. Yellow, glowing eyes flicker toward him, and his head faintly cocks to the side. Izuku looks away abruptly. So, Kurogiri is a hired babysitter, a nanny. Is he a villain? Yes, of course he is. He tried to kill Izuku's whole class. He knowingly dropped them around the USJ with the intention of them being killed by the dozens of villains stalking around. That's villainous. Still, how'd All for One even find someone like Kurogiri? Someone blindly loyal? Someone who'd put their own life on the line for someone like Shigaraki? It doesn't make sense. But then again, nothing around here makes any sense. He's still having a hard time wrapping his brain around it. What could Kurogiri's motives be? Why stick around when Shigaraki acts the way he does? Why remain loyal if there's nothing in it for him? Midoriya Izuku. Izuku jerks his head up to where Kurogiri's watching him. Are you all right? Kacchan tenses at Izuku's side, lips pulled into a vicious snarl. Of course he's not fucking all right. He's got 2 broken arms, for Christ's sake, and you fucking assholes are keeping him here. Kurogiri's face doesn't change as his yellow eyes drift towards Kacchan. If he had a mouth, Izuku would think that he would pull it into an annoyed, chiding line. It's probably the most annoyed Izuku had seen Kurogiri since he'd woken up. Figures it would be Kacchan to unknowingly rile up the patient villain, of course. I'm fine. Izuku shakes his head, trying to rid himself of his thoughts. Thank you. Izuku doesn't need to look over to know that Kacchan is sporting a bewildered look, that he's astonished, maybe even a little miffed or worried. Izuku had just thanked his captor, but Kacchan doesn't know how Kurogiri has been feeding him Advil every 4 to 5 hours since he woken up. Kurogiri doesn't respond other than bowing his head. He returns to his tasks, ignoring the two teens. The fuck is your problem, Deku? Kachan seized under his breath, a few different emotions coloring his tone. He is not your friend. You can't just be nice to every dickhead you meet. He kidnapped you. Yeah, well, I've been awake long enough to realize being a dickhead won't do us any favor, so stop trying to make enemies when we're at their mercy. Izuku growls back in a reply. You're just going to get us killed if you talk to them like that. Just like I said. Watch how you fucking talk to me, you stupid Deku. As it turns out, playing 20 questions with a ghost that he can barely answer yes and no questions with is pretty hard. Hitoshi finds himself sitting on Izuku's bed for quite a long time with the light overhead flickering on and off, flickering in response to his questions. They're at it for a good 2 hours at least, long enough that Hitoshi texts his parents that he'll be out for a while clearing his head. He doesn't mention where he's at, because he's nervous they'll come to bring him home and find him sitting on Izuku's bed with the lights flickering on and off, prompted by his words like he's having a seance or something. He spends the whole morning in Izuku's room, and as much as it pains him to say, they're not that much closer to any answers. Ro doesn't know a lot. It was expected, but now Hitoshi isn't quite sure what to do, how to help. He keeps asking questions, though, in hopes that things might start to click into place, like it really is all about the questions asked. Since Ro's responses are limited to yes and no, he can't just explain. Hitoshi needs to hit the nail on the head to get somewhere, so if he asks a shitty question, Ro gives a shitty answer. It's all one big guessing game. Still, they made progress, just very slowly. But progress is progress. Which leads him to the entrance of the hospital. Standing, staring up at the sliding glass doors, with a frown on his lips. It's weird to be here. Even weirder to be here alone, but Ro had suggested them come here, or Hitoshi asked if he should find his uncle at the hospital, which had led to a very unhelpful yes-no. That led to Hitoshi asking if he should find his uncle, no, then to asking if he should go to the hospital, yes. He's really not sure why he's here, but he trusts the ghost. He's not sure if he's got something planned. I mean, he has to know something, Hitoshi doesn't, and just not how to say it, right? Listen, Ro, you'd better lead me around here, because if someone at reception asks why I'm here, I'll probably get kicked out, since I don't even know why I'm really here. Hitoshi mutters under his breath, followed by the overhead doorway flickering faintly. That, or I'll be admitted to the psych ward or something for following lights and talking to myself. The light flickers quick, and Hitoshi gets the feeling that the ghost is telling him to suck it up. At least Ro is still around. Hey, also, keep me away from my uncles, too, if you would. If they find me, I'm screwed. The light flickers again, almost mockingly. He should have known Ro would have had an attitude about playing games with him. Hitoshi sees the next light in the line, just inside the door, flickering invitingly, and he knows it's Ro trying to prompt him on. He feels ridiculous as he steps through the door and watches as the light flickers in a straight line leading him down a hallway, the opposite direction from the receptionist. Good. Hitoshi bites his lip as he looks around himself to see if anyone else had noticed or even noticing the flickering lights, but he's alone. He lets out a sigh. Well, here goes nothing. He can just hope that Ro has a plan here. All right, everyone, this concludes Chapter 30 of Yuuei Survival Guide. Chapter 31 will be next. Hope you guys are still enjoying, and as always, thank you all so much for listening.